Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi class. Today I will do one video for chapter 18, which is the market for factor of production. So before we go further for this chapter, I would like to recall what we have learned so far and what are the relationship with this. Okay, so far what we have learned is about demand and also supply, right? Demand and also supply. So you remember this? This is supply, this is demand. Don't forget here quantity, price, and this is actually for market for goods and services. Okay, so supply is on producer side and demand is on consumer side. So easy to say, this is about you. So you are the user here or the consumer here. We have learned so many things about just this graph, demand and also supply. So you learn about, for example, about the equilibrium quantity, equilibrium price, what happen if the supply increase to the right, to the left, and what happen if the demand increase to the right, to the left. What are the producer surplus, the area here, the consumer, this one, not producer surplus, this one, consumer surplus. And this area is producer surplus, right? And we have learned about tax exchange, something like this, right? Right. So this is PB, this is PS, right? Easy to say that actually what we discussed so far is what demand supply for market of goods and services, but we have learned so many things. So today we want to move further to one more market, which is the market for factor of production. So what you could expect is we have now the similar thing, demand and also supply. This is supply, this is demand. And you can expect this is about quantity and this is about price. But then, what is factor of production? So, before this, what you learn is about the output. The market for goods and services is the output. And then the market for factor of production is actually the input. So, meaning what are the things that used to supply goods and services? So, this one we can relate with chapter 2 that we learn the input or factor of production. We have 3. One is labor, second is capital, and you also have land. Labor again, this is you. You now supply to the market for factor of production. Okay, and so you can expect here something different here. If in market for goods and services, you are the consumer. Now, in market for factor of production, you are the supplier. And you actually supplying yourself as a labor. So, this is you. And then now we will discuss about the how we can derive the demand for factor of production. And you can expect that the demand for factor of production here is actually derived demand. Because of what? Because the decision to supply the output or goods and services now make us demand for the labor, demand for capital and demand for land. So this is what's your expectation. So we're going to learn about this today. Okay, now we move to the next. Okay, so as I mentioned just now, factor of production. So these are about input used to produce goods and services. And we have 3, labor, land, and also capital. And here what related to you is actually labor. So you are the employee. someday, not today. Okay, now we move to the demand for factor of production. This one I already mentioned just now, because this is not exactly like the demand for goods and services, because this is derived demand. Okay, derived demand meaning it's come from the decision to supply goods and services in another market, which is the market for goods and services. So market for goods and services, this is the output. So when we want to produce clothes, we want to produce food. So everything is here. Then to produce this, we need the input. And today, we will focus on labor. Okay, so next. Okay. Same like the market for the market for goods and services, labor market also governed by supply and also demand. So you can expect the same thing. We have supply, demand, we have quantity, and we have price. But different terminology for price and also different terminology for quantity. And now you are here in this side. Okay, remember this. Okay, this one, labor demand or labor services is equal to input into the production output, not the final good for consumption. Because the final good for consumption, that one is market for goods and services. Okay, next. So you look at here, we have two market for apple and market for apple picker. So apple in this case is goods and services. Apple picker here refer to the labor. Okay, so same like what I mentioned just now, we have supply, demand. So in market for factor of production or labor, in this case we also have supply and also demand. Okay, and here for market for apple, we have price, equilibrium quantity. But in the market for labor, we call it as W, here refer to the wages. Wages of the labor. And then the quantity, in this case quantity of apple picker, is actually refer to the people as employer. Okay, so we can say as number of employment. Okay. So look at here, the apple producer demand for apple picker is derived from the market demand for apple. So the basic tool of supply and demand apply to good and to labor services. So what you mean here, we have a supply and demand in market for goods and services. We also have supply and demand for market for labor. Okay, so next. Okay. So for market for labor, because now we focus more on labor, then later part we will discuss more on capital and also land. Okay, so we have a few assumptions here. So we have learned that before this firm, we have perfect competition, we have oligopoly, monopoly, and also we have monopolistic competition. So in for market for labor or market for goods and services, we assume that the market is perfect competitive market. Not necessarily perfect competitive, but it's just mentioned here is a competitive market, so it could be perfect competitive and it could be monopolistic competition as well. So here the firm is assumed to be competitive in both market, which is the market for input and the market for output. Okay, output refer to the goods and services that we produce, and input refer to the labor. In this case, because the firm is a competitive firm, so they are price taker. Price taker here meaning they pay the market wages and also they get the market price for good. Meaning here they are not they cannot make any decision to determine their own market wages or their own price for the good that they want to produce. So in this case, what they have to decide is actually this thing: the quantity for the good and services to sell, and also the quantity of labor to hire. And then as a competitive market, they are also profit maximizing firm. Okay, so now we move to the third part for this video, which is the production function. Production function is actually, we want to look at the relationship between the input and output. So input versus output. So if you are asked what is actually production function, this is actually about these two, how to relate the input and also the output. And in this case, the graph will be like this. Okay, so this is the output in the y-axis and the input will be in the x-axis. So input in this case refer to the labor and output refer to good and services. Okay, so in this case, refer to the quantity of labor or the input versus the quantity of output. Contoh kat sini latte. So meaning latte will be here at this side. And then input in this case is, for example, baristas. Okay, and then the curve become flatter as the quantity of input increase. Refer to the quantity of labor. Okay, so like this. So we can imagine it should be something like this. At first it's increase, then at some stage it become flatter. So the question is, why the curve like this? Okay, so these are the graph that I mentioned just now. Quantity of apple in this case refer to the good and services, and then quantity of apple picker, this one actually refer to the quantity of labor. Okay, for example, we have this table of production function, then we derive the curve for production function like this. Okay, the production function show how an input into production, in this example, the apple picker or the labor, influence the output from the production. In this case, the output is apple. So as the quantity of input increase, the production function get flatter, and this reflecting the property diminishing marginal product. So you now come to the terminology, the new terminology, which is diminishing marginal product. So what are they? So these are the important part in this chapter, which is to understand what is actually marginal product. In the layman term, okay, so if you look at this word, marginal product, in this case, refer to marginal product of labor. So I put L here, MPL. So we can relate this with the productivity. Okay, if you read the textbook, you won't find any word on productivity. But here, for me to discuss or to explain to you, I will relate the MPL with the productivity. So you can understand that actually the marginal product of labor is actually refer to the productivity. Okay. So next, we will learn what are the diminishing marginal product and diminishing marginal product of labor.